international community would sign this treaty. This treaty will apply only in peace times, as to sign this treaty, there needs to be a lot of negotiations and discussions, and hence this can happen only when two countries are on peaceful terms with each other. And we would also like to say that during war times, nothing is off the table, and hence only during peace times can this treaty be signed. The international community will decide what will happen if any of these countries wage a cyber war against another country, and the punishment will be befitting the crime. Yes, ma'am.
So the punishment will be held if we do have a physical impact, but if it is accused, we're not going to give.
Thank you, ma'am. The team proposition today believes that there has to be huge amount of physical damage taking place in that country. This damage can be in the form of blowing up of nuclear reactors or hacking into the banking systems, and hence team proposition believes that this should be banned. Moving on, continuing in my model, today this treaty will basically establish two main things. First, the no first use policy, and second, avoiding the use of cyber warfare in certain areas such as power grids, national banking facilities, etc. We would also like to say that this would apply because you cannot wage a cyber war against another country to be the first one to wage a cyber warfare against another country. Also, in no circumstance will the defense strategies related to cyber warfare be compromised in any way, and hence in any circumstance, and hence is off the table in this debate. Today, team proposition has two levels of analysis. First, what impact will the treaty have when it's signed to ban cyber warfare? And second, the effectiveness of this treaty. I will be dealing with the first point. Why are treaties signed? Treaties are essentially signed to put systems and processes in place. So basically, it mutually helps to avoid any serious problem. Today, team proposition believes, no thank you ma'am, no thank you sir. Today, team proposition believes that cyber war has been a major threat, and hence it should be banned. It can affect the country either politically, socially, or economically. And this treaty is basically to avoid wars and maintain a peaceful situation, and hence this is why this treaty should be signed. Unlike open warfare, in cyber warfare is a very sneaky form. In open warfare, there are certain etiquettes and certain principles that are to be followed. But cyber warfare is not like this. Cyber warfare is a very sneaky form of warfare, and it can cause a huge amount of problem to decapitate government or important public utilities, and hence team proposition strongly believes that a treaty is the way to move forward and ban cyber warfare. We would also, if this treaty is signed, two things will happen. First, the most obvious reason, it will help maintain peace between countries. It will help maintain a peaceful situation. They will be open to negotiation, and hence will be very useful. And obviously, because of the no first strike policy, no country is going to wage a war, a cyber war against another country, and hence it will be very useful. Yeah.
What exactly is your standard of waging a cyber war? Because according to your definition, if it's not a huge damage, it shouldn't be considered a cyber war.
That is actually what team proposition is trying to say today. There has to be a huge amount of physical impact, and that is why we're banning it today. And since there is a no first strike policy, no country can wage a cyber war against another country, and this helps maintain peaceful situation, and that is what team proposition strongly believes in today. This treaty will create an obligation of all the countries who have signed it to eschew cyber warfare. This would basically ensure, like I was saying, that it would help them maintain peaceful relations this international treaty, considering that it is so important, like I was saying from the beginning of my speech, or it would be easier to find out which country who is not a part of this treaty has waged the cyber war and hence can take proper measures against them. And since there's only a no first strike policy and it can take countermeasures, like we had already stated before, the cyber defense is not at all in this debate. Ladies and gentlemen, let me recap what I have told you throughout the course of my speech. I had clearly defined what cyber warfare meant. We stated that it has to cause huge physical impact on the other country. We gave a model whereby we will not include there will be no first strike policy, and the avoiding of waging cyber warfare or hacking into public utilities, national banks, power grids, etc. And we also spoke in detail about how this treaty could be effective. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to propose.
I thank Prime Minister and now would like to recognize on the leader of opposition to appear for the
Yes, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, cyber warfare in itself might be harmful, however, but we, the opposition side today, think that the resolution that the proposition side is trying to pass here is wrong in practicality and also in principle. We think that cyber warfare is a different type of warfare, but in principle, it is similar to other types of warfare in the sense that cyber weapons represent the national power, and taking away means the decrease of national power in some sense. We think that the nature of cyber warfare is that it is stealthy, as they have agreed, which basically makes the banning and the treaty completely ineffective. Rather, we think that having a better security system on a nation's own, or having like a cybersecurity CIA, like an execution program, is rather a better approach. But before moving on to any of our arguments, I'd like to first rebut to several points made by the proposition. Now, proposition basically said that the main reason on why we should ban it is because it's so bad and it causes so much harms. Well, first of all, we agree to all these harms. However, just because the harm is so big does not mean that we should ban it. We think that we need a much more careful approach on these, as I'll talk about in my arguments too. And then they actually talked about how treaters are supposed to be banning things that are harmful and to regulate those kind of things, and that's why treaters are needed. No, ma'am. However, ladies and gentlemen, we don't think that this is going to work because cyber warfare, as they have mentioned itself, is in a stealthy form, which basically means that you are going to face a hard time verifying who did this or what this is doing. And just to mention, some viruses even are capable of getting rid of their own tracks, and oftentimes you catch and you actually spot the wrong person because the virus contains false information about its identification. So what I'm trying to say here is that when it is really vague that even you cannot know who did it, how can a national international treaty work? So we think that this is impossible, and I'll elaborate this more in the second argument. No, ma'am. And then they actually talk about how with this policy what will happen in the sense that it will maintain peace. Now, two levels of rebuttal. First of all, as our whip speaker has perfectly mentioned, what is the actual standard of them from the first time determining if cyber warfare is taking on or not? Because they actually have defined themselves as having a direct threat, and they talk about nuclear reactors. Yes, we do admit that is a direct harm, but where is the boundary that they are going to say that this is cyber warfare and it is not? Because they said that we need to have an evident physical harm, then what is the boundary of evident physical harm? That's the first rebuttal. And by the way, in their definition, they actually included espionage. However, ladies and gentlemen, this is not even part of the physical harm, so we think that their definition itself is very ambiguous. Second level of rebuttal is that, they actually said that no cyber war will be declared. However, ladies and gentlemen, they actually excluded the war situations, and they only talked about that this treaty is going to take time in only the peacetime. However, what's the meaning of banning it since most of the cyber warfare itself is done in war situations? Yes, ma'am.
We would like to clarify that what we meant by cyber warfare is, even though by means it starts in the virtual world, for it to qualify as cyber warfare, it has to have a physical impact in the real world.
So again, we just repeated that in order to have a cyber warfare, we need a physical impact in the real world. Well, basically every cyber attack can have a threat in the real world. Like if I say that I hacked a computer, that's a physical threat in the real world, right? Because you might lose your videos or any kind of files in your computer. So where's the degree? Should a nuclear reactor So we clearly question their actual standard on this, because if that's not taking place, this policy can be really ambiguous. Going on to our points, we have 3 arguments today. First of all is about asymmetries of position. In this argument, a principal argument, we will tell you about how these developed nations are going to face a military damage. And second level, the second argument, ineffectiveness of international treaties, as I promised you. In this argument about practicality, I will talk about how the international treaties, according to the characteristics of cyber warfare, will not be effective at all. In our third argument, which the second speaker will talk about, he'll talk about the ambiguity and abuse. And in this argument, he'll talk about how not only the developed nations will have a harm, but the developing nations will also have an economic harm. So with that said, let's move on to our arguments. First argument is about the asymmetries of position. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is true that if you have a cyber virus, that is exactly the same of you having a potential missile, because just the fact that you have a lot of viruses ready to attack the other nation's server means that it's just like the equal with you having a lot of missiles ready to shoot for the other nations. What I'm trying to say here is that, no ma'am, the actual cyber terror and the technologies related to it represent the nation's military power or sometimes even national security. Now, however, the signing of this treaty signifies 2 major consequences. One is that it relinquishes a tool of assault, meaning that the method of war against or physical power is restricted to some degree, meaning that we're taking away a weapon. And second, it is letting some nations to protect themselves from other nations' attacks, as in preventing other nations from hacking into the server and damaging it. Yes, ma'am.
Sir, the international community in its entirety helping one nation can make the nation far stronger in defense than it helping itself.
Now, I don't really understand that about how this policy can actually help a nation in maintaining with its military power, because again, what's really happening here is that if you're banning cyber warfare, since as I've said, this is cyber warfare, there's a huge disparity between technology, right? Even the poorest nation has a gun or a tank, but in this case, it's totally different. Nations that are really poor don't even have a server, and they're not even capable of making cyber weapons. That's why there's a huge disparity, and that's why in this case, the actual balance will be taken away, because we are basically taking away, the weapons of the developing nations who have already had the technology, and we think that this is unfair, because obviously we don't take away guns and weapons and tanks, right? We don't really see the difference there. So the problem for banning is that it takes away the leverage of some nations in their national defense and power. For these certain nations, we think that the second consequence about the protection is not even applicable at all. For example, in nations like China, Japan, and Russia, which rely a lot on cyber warfare, we think that for these nations, the actual ban of cyber warfare is simply taking away a major leverage that they actually rely on, causing disparity. This is only benefiting the nations which are not even focusing on the cyber warfare, since they are not even the subject of cyber warfare in any ways, because they don't have a server to be hacked, like that kind of thing. Now, however, these nations will still able to get benefits from such policy, since a reliable source of power will be taken away from the other nations. So in this argument, I basically proved to you how this disparity will be formed in a military sense, so that the nations who have the cyber technology, who have all these cyber viruses ready to go, that they invested like millions of dollars, will be obviously given a harm, because we're taking away some part of military power only for some nations while you're not. So we think that this treaty is causing inequality. Second argument is basically about the ineffectiveness of international treaties. In this argument, I'll basically tell you again about the practicality issues, about how their definition clearly makes it vague, and how it is from the first time impractical for us to have an international treaty. Now, the nature of the cyber warfare in itself is a surreptitious matter, as they have agreed. It's stealthy, it's hard to verify, it's hard to even find out. However, treaties are designed to regulate only the obvious parts which can be identified and verified. Treaties are meant to be international agreements and promises, and these are done only for things that can even be seen and detected. This is because otherwise it gets ambiguous in the actions of the cause itself, and it can be easily abused. The nature of cyber warfare, as they have agreed, is that it is stealthy, and it makes international treaty out of its purpose. It is hard to detect, and even if it is detected, there's a high possibility that they might spot the wrong person, considering that it's a virus and it can always have false information. Therefore, as we can see from the nature of cyber warfare, we think that the treaties can be obviously ineffective because it is always ambiguous. Now, to give you like some examples about the failures of treaties before I end my speech, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in Whaling. The reason why both of them failed and don't have any effect anymore was because it focused on things that is ambiguous. How can you check if the nation is building a nuclear reactor? How can you track all these whales like dying and these kind of things? If you can't verify, don't have a policy and a treaty, because it's not going to work. So with that said, we want you to vote for us. Thank you.
Thanks for the video of the position. now I would like to invite the PPT practice.
Ladies and gentlemen, as the Deputy Prime Minister in today's debate, I strongly hope to answer a few questions that I believe have arisen. First of all, we believe that the question of anonymity and ambiguity has come. Also, that the opposition thinks that we are taking away weapons, when I will explain in my point of effectiveness how we are not taking away weapons. Also, the question of disparity came about in their points, where we believe that if in our model we've explained that there's no first choose policy and all the countries are coming together and are being bound by this treaty to help each other in times of crisis, then there can't possibly be any disparity. Also, the question of anonymity and ambiguity will be answered in my point. So continuing on my substantial point, today I will be explaining to you about the effectiveness of such a treaty. Now, the big question that we would try to answer in this debate is that would nations or parties that sign this international treaty banning cyber warfare honor it in letter and in spirit? The answer Team Proposition has today is that they would, because A, many treaties have been signed in the past and they have invariably been honored. As we pointed out at the beginning, they come together to put systems and processes in place for their own mutual good.
Good information, ma'am.
In the past, it has also been noticed that a vast majority always comply because these are not frivolous things but matters of national and international strategic concerns. Okay. So another question we have in this debate is that could there be a slippery slope by way of room for proxy cyber wars? Our answer to that is, once the involved international communities agree to come to the table, they've agreed to respect each other's needs and also their own vulnerabilities. As a result, although they agreed to sign an international treaty, they do not want to foreclose the option of continued cyber defense strategy developments. Hence, the treaty would be signed with the inclusion of maximum flexibility for themselves and hidden constraints as well, such as cyber stockpiling. Now, hoping to answer the question of the weapons that we mentioned we will not be taking away, because in this treaty we believe in we believe that in a world like there is today, where such technological advances are taking place, can we really stop weapon development? So, as to answer that, we believe that we will not stop countries from cyber stockpiling. Also, we would like to address the issue of smaller countries that may not be able to defend themselves. Through this treaty, we believe that all the countries that co-sign this treaty would come together and be bound by this treaty to help each other in times of dire crisis if anyone would start a cyber war. Also, we believe that any country that cannot contain or handle their cyber weapons, those only will be taken away. Answering another question is that we are.
Before anything, please explain to us again until what boundaries are going to accept as cyber warfare and what boundaries not.
Okay, thank you, sir. Basically, the boundaries we accept today are explained in our model as there will be a cyber warfare. Basically, what we've defined as may start in the virtual world, but must have a physical impact in the real world, or as in military terms, a kinetic impact. We believe that cyber warfare is not an active weapon, but does have the power to either enable or disable some physical So through these, suppose a country wants to do as such, it would not want to be framed for it, and therefore it would use such tactics. So it would be quite easy to know who these perpetrators are, to know which country exactly, because most of these countries are in it for national and international strategic concerns of their own countries. So what have I told you today? I have explained to you about the effectiveness of the international treaty that the proposition believes we must sign in banning cyber warfare. We've addressed questions such as whether to address issues such as anonymity and ambiguity in cyberspace, as that is the great challenge that we have identified in today's debate, which would be through countries that may not want to be framed as perpetrators of a crime as such. Also, we have answered a question that we believe may arise in this debate about whether countries would honor it in letter and in spirit. Our answer to that was that many treaties have been signed in the past, and they have invariably been honored. As we pointed out at the beginning, they come together to put systems and processes in place. For their own mutual good. So every country's job is to think of the betterment of their own citizens, and only to think in their national and international interests. So naturally they would sign this treaty. And in the past, it has always been noticed that a vast majority always complied, because matters like cyber warfare are not frivolous. They are matters of great national and international strategic concerns. Our first speaker spoke to you about the impact of such a treaty and what it would be on the world. So we hope that we have addressed all the questions today through the first speech and the second speech. Hoping we've convinced you. I beg to close.
7 minutes, 57 seconds.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Now I should recognize the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. As always, the answer to this case lies in the wording of the motion itself. This has to sign an international treaty banning cyber warfare. In our first point, we talked about the principle behind cyber warfare and how we're unfairly taking away national power. In the second point, we talked about the ineffectiveness of the word treaty. In the third point, we're going to take a look at a deep analysis of the word ban and what the embedded meaning is. But before we get to that, I would first like to rebut some of the points made by side government. So, we already seem to have a clash on the clarity of cyber warfare. And they seem to set the parameters fairly well, but we have a problem with it because one said that it's only going to be confined to things that have actual physical damage, actually huge physical damage, which in itself is already ambiguous. But then at the same time, they said that they're going to deal with espionage as well because it's closely related to war. So I don't think that espionage, while it may cause some economic harm, is not really a physical harm. And we believe we're questioning the basis of their defining the severity of cyber attacks. So in some cases, civilian attacks that are not necessarily physical, such as DDoS, which they denied would be included in this resolution, might be even more harmful than some, I'll give you a moment, might be even more harmful than some of the actual physical harm that cyber warfare can create. Yes, ma'am.
So we believe that any form of cyber war that happens between governments will have a large impact, and that is why we have spoken about a huge impact. And espionage also has a huge impact physically because all economic crises will result in a lot of physical damage too.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily true with all sorts of economic espionage. That's one response. And also, they still have an answer to the second line rebuttal that we don't think that just because cyber warfare reaches out to civilians, we should exclude it in the treaty. In some cases, we actually believe that if cyber warfare attacks civilians, that's the most serious concept that we should be signing a treaty about. And yet, that was the very criteria that they excluded in their definition of the cyber warfare that we're dealing with in this context. So we want answers in those areas. And in their, no, thank you, and their next point about the effectiveness of a treaty. Here they made several mistakes. The one was that the Prime Minister came up here and said that admitted that cyber warfare in nature is very sneaky and surreptitious. And yet, the next speaker came up and said, cyber stockpiling, it's going to work. Well, apparently it didn't when the US FTC got hacked and they couldn't figure out the origin. It didn't when just this month the Australian CIA was hacked and they couldn't find the origin. It's the CIA of one nation probably has the most powerful information technology, and yet they could not identify the origin. Do you still think the stockpiling is a good method? The second mistake that they made in the Prime Minister's speech, I'll take a moment now, was that they admitted that not everyone is going to sign the treaty, isn't it?
So we believe that the CIA, as you mentioned, has not been able to identify whatever virus because there was no cooperation with CIA. Now that there is an international treaty, countries will help identify viruses, and that will
Thank you, ma'am. The terms that you're using, I'm sorry, but are very vague, such as help, cooperation. We need some solid evidence that if more nations engage on this, we're going to have some serious effect other than just signing a treaty, a nominal agreement. We want more than that. And we don't think that the CIA should not be able to find the origin of hacking if they make it sound so easy. And back to the second mistake that they made, which was that they admitted that not everyone is going to sign a treaty. The same problem with the Nuclear Proliferation Act, which North Korea refused to sign. So if not everyone, if the prime attackers of cyber warfare are not going to sign a treaty, what is the point of having this in the first place? That's also something that they need to answer. Now, the third mistake that they made was when they said small nations can come together in defense. Now, first of all, that admits that there still is potential for attack from the stronger nation. And secondly, this hasn't happened yet in conventional warfare. Like Ethiopia, Lebanon, do you think that they can come together and magically have better IT technology that can fight US with? No, thank you. That is just a blatant assumption that cannot be proven. And the fourth mistake that they made was when they said that cyber warfare could be used as defense. So my question is, if it can be used as defense, why can't it be used as attack? They admitted themselves, without realizing it, that this treaty is fraught with holes and mistakes. So these are the major questions that they need to answer. Now to move on to rebuilding the case for side opposition. So in response to our first point about how this is just like conventional warfare and we shouldn't take away national power, they said that we are not taking away national power because there's a system of defense called stockpiling. And they keep talking about emphasizing the gravity of cyber warfare itself, but that's really not the matter here. Cyber warfare in itself may be bad, but when put to international context, its dangers might not be proven by side government just yet. They only gave us potential harms, talking about potential examples of banking systems and transportation systems and espionage, but they have not given us actual precedents, which gets me wondering, maybe cyber warfare in itself is bad, but in the real world, has any actual harm happened so far? So we asked for them to give solid examples. And in response to our second point, they again contradicted themselves by saying that it's quite easy to find the origin. I already refuted that by giving my 2 examples, and also contradiction because their Prime Minister blatantly admitted that this is sneaky in nature, surreptitious, hard to supervise. Now to move on to the third point for side opposition, which is the ambiguities. And the embedded meaning in the word ban is you detect and you punish. So let's look at those 2 meanings. You detect the subject of hackers. Is that possible? The question is how to differentiate between individual hackers and state hackers. Should a lone hacker be treated differently from states? Or state hire the individual hackers? If you could ever tell the difference, that is. I don't think you can. So a number of clarifications side government must address. Is this resolution supposed to regulate cybercrime on all individuals at a universal level? I hope that's not the case because that is just not possible. But if that's not the case, how will you distinguish a state from an individual? And how will you deal with an individual that was hacked, that was hired by a government to do it? Are we going to treat them the same way? And how will the punitive measures be different? We want an answer. Here's an example I found rather entertaining. A water pumping station in the US was assumed to have been hacked by Russian intelligence. Turned out to be the mistake of an American power plant worker vacationing in Russia. Ladies and gentlemen, one individual's mistake could have been blown up to a nation-scale war. And we don't think this is just a matter of technicality. This is a matter of fundamental values that this world has been striving to protect. And if one individual's mistake can blow up to a nationwide war between 2 very powerful nations, we believe that there are some serious problems that this resolution has. Now, the second embedded meaning of the word ban was punish, detect and punish. But the problem is, it's hard to define what cyber warfare is and when it is started. So 2 main problems, unlike conventional warfare, is that it's not clearly defined and it lacks a declaration because, as they admit it, it's surreptitious in nature and you don't know when it happens. So it is prone to abuse, meaning that developed nations or any other nations can use this to economically curb the IT technology developing nations. So we explained that military-wise, this is unfair to the developed nations because it's taking away national power. But at an economic level, they can abuse the system and fabricate some systems where they appear as if they have been attacked, because that is very easy to do. And use that as an excuse to curb IT technology. The same way they put ceilings on CO2 emissions so that these developing nations could not develop, the same way they were trying to regulate nuclear power plants under the pretext of world protection. It's the same pattern, it's the exact same pattern. We have sound good reason, we have some fake appearance on the outside, a good pretext, cyber appease. But really, nations can use this as an excuse to curb the development of IT technology, which is going to be a very important domain in the 21st century. And we don't think that's a fair point. We think that's going to create more disparity in the economic field. So a lot of crucial burdens that the government has so far neglected, and we hope to hear more questions and answers to that. So for these reasons, and the reasons my partner has stated, this resolution will fall. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for taking our conversation. And now I would like to invite our to
Ladies and gentlemen, before I go on to flashpoints, let me first clarify some basic questions that were asked. First, ladies and gentlemen, the opposition have asked us that if cyber warfare by itself is war, why is this treaty during peace times? Let us explain that cyber warfare in our treaty is dealing with the starting and initiation of a war. When a treaty has to be signed, countries have to agree and come to the negotiating table. And that, in our model, that these countries, by coming to the negotiating table, are agreeing not to be the first person to start the war. Therefore, we are talking about preventing war. We are not talking about what happens during an actual physical war. We do not want to go into an actual physical war before we can prevent it. If there is a chance to prevent, that is our first choice. Then, ladies and gentlemen, they have also asked us on examples of how and where cyber warfare has been banned. Ladies and gentlemen, can you not see what is happening in the world today? Iran is being affected by nuclear plants. USA and Israel are quick to attacking other countries using cyber warfare. They themselves agree that China is using a lot of cyber warfare. And also, ladies and gentlemen, can we forget Stuxnet and Flame? Ladies and gentlemen, moving on. Thank you, sir. Today we have two major flashpoints. First, the effectiveness of the treaty, and second, the disparity that it can cause that has been claimed by the opposition. Today, ladies and gentlemen, effectiveness. Both teams have agreed that cyber warfare is stealthy. Cyber warfare is sneaky. Now, what we on team proposition believe is that right now it is stealthy and sneaky because no one is willing to come and say, we will not use it. Because no one is willing to come and say, I think in a minute, ma'am, sir, no one is willing to come and say that we will help you identify that where the cyber warfare initiated. Because no countries are coming together to say that I will help you in defense. Therefore, we believe that if countries come together to sign an international treaty, they address the problem and help make the process faster in addressing and finding the origin of the cyber warfare. Yes?
Do you support your assumption that when these nations come together and cooperate, we'll be able to find it? Because with the world's best technology, they actually spotted the wrong person.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, what we believe is first that signing a treaty is the best choice, is the best chance we have at finding it. We believe that countries need to come and swear their cooperation and accept to help each other. And that is what our model and our case revolves around, that this treaty will also encourage countries to help other nations that cannot do so on their own. If a CIA cannot work on its own to find out what a virus can do,
do the hacking for them? How do we defend that?
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, this has already been addressed by our second speaker saying what happens when these governments go in the back door. We believe that first, this is going to be a lot harder because these governments now have signed a treaty and therefore cannot do it formally, cannot do it with effect as they can now. Second, they do not want to be pinpointed at being in committing a crime. So we believe that the impact that will have and the effect and that signing this treaty will at least minimize the possibility and minimize the effect and impact cyber warfare has today. And ladies and gentlemen, when they brought up the Russian example of having a different person being the initiator of that, we believe that if the Russian government had signed a treaty and if the Russian government had cooperated in the first place and there was an international treaty in the first place, that would have been solved much easier because now the Russian government has proved that they did not start it. Now the Russian government has evidence and has all the necessary requirements and the Russian government themselves are cooperating and helping these people identify that no, it was not them who started it but some misrepresentation inside their country. Therefore, we understand that this problem of a country being framed is also reduced, ladies and gentlemen. Further, let us talk about what happens when there is no balance between technology and development, ladies and gentlemen. What they spoke that cyber warfare is technology, cyber warfare is development. What we believe is that yes, countries have the right to develop defense. What we believe is wrong is that they cannot induce cyber warfare, they cannot initiate cyber warfare with another country. If you're willing to improve your defense strategies, go ahead. If you think it is important for your technology, go ahead. No, thank you, ma'am. If you believe that it is necessary for you, then you can have the defense mechanisms and you can have, but you cannot use it as you can use it only if you are not the initiator of this cyber war. Then, ladies and gentlemen, let us continue with the second flashpoint, which is disparity. Today, the team opposition have clearly not understood what we've been talking about. We have equally said as much as you will not start the war if a country that hasn't signed the treaty starts a war and one of the countries who have signed the treaty are affected, all the countries will come together to defend that country. Which means if USA has been part of the treaty and say there is a war against Somalia, then we believe that USA will protect Somalia. No, we are not asking Somalia to come to defend against the US. We believe that this is similar to the working of the NATO. If there is a country that requires defense strategies, all the countries part of the NATO will help that country with their defense strategies, will ensure and help or detect where the issue initiated and help this country protect and improve its defense mechanisms so that it is not affected by external cyber warfare. Ladies and gentlemen. Also for their example of the NPT not working, we would like to bring up the counterexample of the Ottawa Landmine Convention. Each and every treaty has its benefits. When you can ban landmines, when countries can come together and ensure there are no landmines left, when countries can even combat something such as climate change as in the Kyoto Protocol, we believe that countries coming together to combat cyber warfare is very effective. And that this is at least a step. Even if countries argue or even if the opposition argues that this is not fully effective, we believe it makes a difference and that this difference is good enough and this difference is necessary currently in the status quo, ladies and gentlemen. And also, we believe that when countries can come together, when countries can agree not to start war, when countries can agree to help other countries build defense, we believe that cyber warfare is the best way to ensure that countries do not harm themselves, do not harm other countries, and that cyber warfare is kept on check. With that, I beg to propose. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, and I would like to call Mr. Biggs for the results.
Now the proposition painted a picture for us that somehow we all enter the negotiating table, shake hands, and never again use cyber warfare ever again. But we see that's not the case in reality, and we see that this actually makes other countries vulnerable, even more vulnerable to the harms of cyber warfare, because they're unable to create their defense mechanisms, because they're unable to see what kind of harms that they can create without these mechanisms. So we say in this case that today we've proven to you that number one, there is no justification that we strongly argue against this motion. Now with that said, I have three clashes that I'd like to present in today's debate. Number one, I'm going to examine whether there's a difference between conventional warfare and cyber warfare. Second of all, will an international treaty be effective? Third, and I'm going to talk about in the third clash, the social implications that happen on an individual and an international scale when it comes to cyber warfare. Now starting off with the first clash, is there really a difference between conventional and cyber warfare? Now, today, in today's debate, the proposition clearly had to define or differentiate what the difference is, what's exclusive about cyber warfare compared to conventional warfare. And the differences they brought up is the gravity of cyber warfare, how harmful it is, how we can blow up nuclear weapons, nuclear reactors, how we can shut down banks. I can see that tanks can do that as well. I can see that grenades can do that as well. These are harms that can be caused by other new weapons. Why not ban tanks then? Why not ban grenades then? Because they can cause those harms too, right? They show you that there is a lot of harm there. No, thank you, ma'am. There is a potential of harm, but how is this harm different from other harms that other weapons provide for us? We see they clearly haven't differentiated these two types of harms when it comes to normal warfare and cyber warfare. Second of all, they talked about how it's sneaky. It's like a sneaky way in order to go to other countries. So let's see in the time of war, we have spies, we have intelligence agents, we have all these people that do or gain intelligence for their country. How is this really going to work on your side when cyber warfare is equal to that of those kinds of situations? We say in that case, it's not different from conventional warfare at all because conventional warfare also has that sneaky mechanism within the war. I'll take it in a moment, ma'am. And we say in that case, if your side is saying it's constantly sneaky, how are the other countries going to know who actually sent that virus to that country? Yes, ma'am.
We believe that the difference is the million miles that separates them and that millisecond that it takes to create cyber warfare.
Well, still we see in that case, it's the same as the sneaky argument. If you have a spy entering another country, how are you going to find out whose spy it is? How are you going to find out what kind of harm that spy will do? In that sense, it's the same thing. We haven't shown a clear differentiation between conventional warfare and the harms that brings and cyber warfare in itself. They also talked about the huge physical damage, and we questioned this throughout the debate, what kind of huge physical damage it is. 3 points of reputation. Number one, so basically if you say there isn't any physical damage done, no harm or will not punish the country that does it, right? So if you get caught and then punished, if you get caught but not actually create a certain damage, so you just let that country go, is that what you're saying? So basically if a robber enters my house but doesn't, we catch him before he breaks anything, I just let the robber go? That's what they're saying here, because if there is no huge physical damage, they're not going to do anything, right? They're not going to punish them, right? That's what they're saying in today's opposition case, and we completely deny that idea. Second of all, what exactly is huge physical damage? For me, if someone breaks into my computer, personal computer, and deletes all my home files, I would get physically damaged and mentally damaged. That's huge physical damage for me, right? So what exactly is that standard? It can also, for third level of reputation, it can also be abused. It can also be abused by other countries, even if it was a slight physical damage. We can all agree that it was something slight. If some country has if country A has something against country B, they can easily use that and say, oh, you caused huge physical damage to my country, you have waged war against us. That way, it can be abused as well. So therefore, we say there isn't a difference between conventional warfare and cyber warfare. They clearly haven't provided us with the justification to prove these two things. I'm moving on to our second clash. No, thank you, ma'am. Will an international treaty be effective? Now, we showed you today that working together doesn't actually work. When they said people will unite and help them, it doesn't work that way. The math doesn't work that way. For example, let's say US has a cyber warfare capability of 100, and Australia, for example, has a capability of 50. You don't put the 100, I'll take it more, ma'am. You don't put the 150 together to make 150. The biggest capability that we have on these allied states is still 100. That means that the power of abuse can happen as well when a certain country, level of country, has a higher amount of cyber warfare technologies than other countries as well. Yes?
Matthew, you realize that US and Australia have already signed this treaty with each other, claiming disarmament?
Okay, number one, that was just an analogy that I want to show you that it doesn't work out that way. And second of all, we say, even if they sign it, we've given you the example of the non-proliferation treaty, right? How North Korea didn't sign it, that's why it didn't work. We say it's not going to have a unanimous, it's not going to be a universal agreement that it's going to happen. So on that case, we say that falls. And second of all, we're going to talk about how we've shown you a better way to approach this problem. We've shown you that rather make defense mechanisms in order to protect your country from these warfare rather than having an international treaty. We say this is exclusive for their proposition side because you can't actually defend yourself if you sign this treaty. So it's kind of weird to say you're not allowed to have cyber warfare technologies, but you can still build defenses attack certainly occurs. So for the countries that don't have this mechanism, it's better for them to develop it. It's better for us to actually have an arms race to stop other countries from making this possible. So second of all, for second point, this international treaty won't be effective. The solvency doesn't lie in international treaties, but rather make your country defend yourself, make your country make this technology even better for your country. That's how it should work. That's how it should work in today's stance. Now our last and third clash about the social implications. And I'm going to talk about this into two levels. Number one, I'm going to talk about the individual level and the international level. For individual level, we've talked to you constantly, or first and second speaker, asked you or questioned you about what happens to normal hackers. What happens to people, individuals who try to attack another country, or if the government asks individuals to hack it for them. We've shown you that it doesn't work in these cases. How are you going to punish these countries or these nations if they have a business case? Our second speaker also gave me an example of an employee of a nuclear reactor. I'll take you in a moment now. Nuclear reactor going to vacation in another country and basically saying, pressing the wrong button, almost causing a war against Russia. Yes. Okay. No, thank you, ma'am. We say in those cases, there are so many cases that this may be viewed in a different way, that it causes potential war when war didn't have to happen. So in this case, on an individual level, it will have negative social implications. On an international level, we've shown you that we don't know who the attacking country is. We don't know who it is that we're attacking because it raises the files that it has gone through. We've shown you in today's arguments that the US, CIA, and all these other organizations weren't able to find out who it was from. So we can say, oh, maybe that person attacked them, maybe that country attacked us. It's still open to abuse because if you want to wage war against another country, this is the real thing that you use against that country by saying, you attacked us, we're going to wage war against you. In that sense, it can be abuse. So basically we say on an individual level and an international level, there will be negative social implications. So today in my speech, I've shown you there is no justification because there is no difference between conventional warfare and cyber warfare. They haven't clearly made up that difference. Second of all, it is ineffective, and third of all, because of the exacerbation of problems, because it has negative social implications, we strongly beg to oppose. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Shabir. And now I would like to invite our representative.
Sorry, you have to be a bit louder than just now.
Just in the previous speaker?
What?
Okay.
Yeah, then your volume sound is still louder, please.
Okay. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So, the victory conditions for side government in today's debate. Let's go over those two key questions. The first one was they needed to prove why we need to ban cyber warfare. And the second question is, or the second point rather, was they needed to prove why we should do it using an international treaty. So let's go over those two issues. Number one, should cyber warfare be banned? We believe that cyber warfare at the principal level is the same with conventional warfare. And the same way you don't ban cannons and grenades in conventional warfare, we don't see any justification for banning cyber warfare. That's like saying that we should kill people, we should cut down on the population of the Chinese because they have more soldiers to start with. I mean, that's a disparity, yes, but just because there's a difference, you can't just take that away in order to create a level playing field. That's the kind of logic the side government has been using. Also, at the economic level, the problem with cyber warfare is that it has many implications, and one of which is the IT technology that goes along with it. It is very closely linked with economic ideas. So can this not be just another ladder kicked away for the developed nations to curb the progress of the developing nations? I don't understand what makes them think that the U.S. cannot use minor espionage incidents to, I don't know, maybe close down international trade with whichever country that they no longer want to trade with, or curb the technology development of a country that they do not want to gain too much economic power. So yes, this is front of view. And the problem is side government has completely dropped this argument. So they have neglected to see the negative sides of banning cyber warfare. And we see that they lack justification to explain how this is so different from conventional warfare that we need to ban it. Now let's take a look at the second issue, which is why we should use an international treaty to achieve this goal. So they have attached several labels to this thing called international treaty. At once they said it was a pledge, and then they said it was sneaky, which are incompatible because you can't promise to ban something that you can't see.
Now, the second label that they attached to it was cooperation. But that's just a blatant assumption, because just because you combine more countries doesn't mean that you have better technology. Just because you combine more computers doesn't mean you get smarter or you have better abilities to detect it. The Australian CIA has been unable to do it. The US CIA has been unable to do it. We believe that through example, we have proved the ambiguity and the impossibility of detecting the origin of a cyber attack. Now, another argument that they dropped regarding the treaty is how they can defend themselves, but they can't somehow use that cyber technology to attack. I mean, that's another contradiction that they dropped. And also, they neglected to explain how we can possibly differentiate between states and individual hackers. And if we can ever find out if the individual hackers were hired by the government. And they also neglected the serious implication that a single individual's mistake could be blown up to a nationwide war. And that's more than just a technical problem. That's something that holds the life of many people at stake. And we believe that their lack of response at this point is yet another reason why that opposition deserves to take. Another key issue in practicality why international treaty can't work is ambiguity and anonymity. And they admit it that these problems exist, and yet they fail to prove it. We see this as a great, serious negligence of their major burden of proof. Because if they admit that this is not going to work, it doesn't matter how good the principle is, it just can't bring the goals that we want, and it's meaningless. See, they're saying another problem was the clarity of the definition, and we haven't settled on this issue yet. They include espionage, and yet they said it must have great physical damage. So minor espionage they include in the definition, and DDoS they don't, even if it causes nationwide harm. So it's not okay to attack a government or a power plant, but it's okay to unleash a nationwide denial of service on the entire nation, so as to cause an immediate stagnation in the economy and cause many social harms. So on these grounds of their lack of justification explaining why cyber warfare should be banned, and their lack of explanation on why we should use an international treaty to solve this problem, we believe we should take this break. Thank you.
4 minutes and 40 seconds.
I think our session is live, and now we'd like to invite our vice speaker to the first debate. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, today we believe that the opposition has not listened to one word the proposition has spoken to about, and they've harped on and on about things that we have constantly answered in every speech that we have presented to you today. So, in order for the opposition and the House to today understand what exactly the proposition has stated, I, the reply speaker, am here to sum up today's debate. First of all, we would like to clarify every single question posed to us in this debate. They asked us, first of all, why would we ban cyber warfare? We would ban it because we have proved to them time and again in our model, in our definition, that cyber warfare is bad. We warned them about the dangers of cyber warfare with some examples, and we believe the question they asked about why would we use a treaty would be because it's the first step towards eliminating cyber warfare. It's a basic step in the right direction. It's a stepping stone to what we believe the future could hold. Also, they asked us about what if the government hires hackers, which we already answered in a point that our second speaker mentioned, which was that through our treaty, the co-signees, suppose a country wanted to hire some hackers because they would not want to be perpetrated. We said that through the treaty and through the cooperation of these countries, we would find the country that did through the cooperation of these countries, because they are bound by the treaty to cooperate in such instances. Where they spoke about, where they gave us the example of an American who was vacationing in Russia and created a problem that could have very well led in a great problem in the US. Well, we believe, and we did answer, that if this treaty had been in place, Russia would have come forward and we would have known that Russia was not the perpetrator from the very beginning. Also, they have clearly constantly asked us about our definition, stating that this is not clear, but we have given them an answer in every case because unlike open